The millionaire spat on the ground in public and forced the maid to clean it up just to humiliate her. A mysterious person recorded everything, and what happens 2 hours later will shock you. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Empire Enterprises headquarters, its warmth failing to penetrate the cold atmosphere that permeated the building's grand lobby. Maria Santos, a cleaning staff member who had worked there for 15 years, stood frozen in place, her weathered hands clutching a cleaning cloth as she faced the most humiliating moment of her career. Maxwell Sterling, the CEO of Empire Enterprises, towered over her, his expensive Italian shoes gleaming under the chandelier's light. The lobby had fallen silent, dozens of employees and visitors watching the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and helplessness. Sterling's face contorted into a sneer as he looked down at the small puddle of spittle he had just deposited on the immaculate floor. "Clean it," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had never heard the word no in response to an order. "That's what we pay you for, isn't it?" Maria's fingers tightened around the cloth, her knuckles turning white. 15 years of silent submission, of swallowing her pride to keep her job, of enduring countless small humiliations, all of it crystallized in this moment. Something inside her, a dam holding back years of suppressed dignity, began to crack. In the deathly quiet lobby, someone's phone made a subtle sound, the telltale click of a recording starting. Sterling didn't notice, his attention fixed on Maria, waiting for her to bend down and clean up after him as she had done countless times before. But this time was different. Maria lifted her eyes to meet his, her voice barely above a whisper but steady as steel. "No, Mr. Sterling, I won't." The silence in the lobby deepened, if that was possible. Sterling's face reddened, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "What did you say?" "I said no." Maria's voice grew stronger. "I am a person, not your doormat. I clean because it's my job, but this is not part of my job." Sterling stepped closer, his expensive cologne overwhelming. "You'll do as I say or you'll find yourself without a job. Is that what you want? To join the ranks of the unemployed, to lose everything you've worked for?" Maria felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Behind Sterling, she could see phones being raised, more people recording. The moment was being captured, preserved, shared. She thought of her daughter, Eleanor, working her way through college. What would Elena think if she saw her mother on her knees, cleaning up a powerful man's spite? "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice now clear enough to carry across the lobby, "I would rather lose my job than lose my dignity." The words hung in the air like crystal, sharp and bright. Sterling's face twisted into something ugly, something that revealed the monster beneath the expensive suit and carefully crafted public image. He reached for Maria's arm, his fingers closing around her wrist with bruising force. "You insolent!" "Mr. Sterling?" A sharp voice cut through the tension. Samantha Chen, the company's head of legal affairs, strode across the lobby, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "I suggest you release Mrs. Santos immediately." Sterling's grip loosened, his business instincts taking over. He looked around, finally noticing the forest of phones pointed in his direction. His face smoothed into a practiced smile, but his eyes remained cold as ice. "Mrs. Santos and I were just having a discussion about proper workplace conduct," he said smoothly, taking a step back. "Weren't we, Mrs. Santos?" Maria said nothing, her wrist throbbing where he had grabbed her. She watched as Sterling straightened his tie, nodded to the gathered crowd as if nothing had happened, and walked toward the elevator. The doors opened immediately. They always did for him, and he disappeared behind them. Only then did Maria allow herself to breathe. Samantha Chen approached her, concern evident on her face. "Are you all right, Mrs. Santos? We should document." That grab, it was clearly visible on camera. Maria nodded numbly, but her mind was already racing ahead. She had worked at Empire Enterprises long enough to know its secrets, to hear the whispers in the corridors, to clean the offices late at night when confidential documents were left carelessly on desks. She knew things about Maxwell Sterling. and his empire that could shake it to its foundations. For 15 years she had kept silent, telling herself it wasn't her place to speak up. But now, watching the video of her confrontation with Sterling being shared from phone to phone, she realized something. Sometimes the smallest act of defiance could create the largest cracks in the mightiest walls. As she followed Samantha Chen to the legal department, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced. In years, hope. Not just for herself, but for all the others who had suffered under Sterling's reign of arrogance and cruelty. The time for silence was over. What she didn't know then was that her simple act of defiance would set in motion a chain of events that would bring an empire to its knees, unite unlikely allies, and expose decades of buried secrets. The video making its way across social media platforms was just the beginning, the first pebble in what would become an avalanche. In a modest apartment across town, James Chen hunched over his laptop, watching the viral video for the 20th time. His hands trembled as he recognized the man in the expensive suit, Maxwell Sterling, the same man whose company had destroyed his family's legacy, the same man who had never been held accountable for the accident that changed everything. The cleaning lady's defiance stirred something in him, a mix of admiration and bitter remembrance. 2 years ago, he had stood before Sterling's empire as a different person, a successful project manager, a father, a man with dreams. Now he was just another face in the crowd, carrying the weight of injustice on his shoulders. His phone buzzed. Another news notification about the viral video. The incident was spreading like wildfire across social media platforms, with "That's and Sterling shame" trending nationwide. James closed his eyes, memories flooding back unbidden. "Dad, look what I made." His son's voice echoed in his mind, the last words he'd heard from Tommy before the accident at the Sterling Enterprises construction site. The official report claimed it was user error, but James knew better. He had seen the falsified safety reports, the corners cut to save money, the warnings ignored. A knock at his door startled him from his reverie. Opening it, he found himself face to face with a young man he'd never seen before. The stranger was well dressed but seemed nervous, constantly adjusting an old-fashioned pocket watch in his hands. "Mr. Chen." The young man's accent was slight, but noticeable. "My name is Marcus Rivera. I've been looking for you." James studied the visitor carefully. "How did you find me?" "Through careful research," Marcus replied, his fingers still fidgeting with the watch. "I know about what Sterling did to your family. I know about the covered-up accident. And I think we might be able to help each other." James stepped aside, letting Marcus enter his small apartment. The young man moved with a careful grace, his eyes taking in the sparse furnishings, the wall covered in newspaper clippings about Sterling Enterprises, and the laptop still playing the viral video on repeat. "I saw the video too," Marcus said, gesturing to the screen. "That woman, she reminded me of my mother, always strong, even in the face of impossible odds." He paused, turning the watch over in his hands. "Mr. Chen, what I'm about to tell you might sound unbelievable, but I need you to listen." James sat down, motioning for Marcus to do the same. The young man perched on the edge of the sofa, his posture tense. 25 years ago, Marcus began, Sterling had a partner. His name was Antonio Rivera. They built Empire Enterprises together, but Sterling, he wanted more. He orchestrated a hostile takeover, framed my father for financial fraud, and took everything. My father disappeared after that, but not before. He left me this. He held up the watch. It's broken, stuck at the exact time when everything fell apart. James leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've spent years gathering evidence, building a case. I have proof of Sterling's corruption, his illegal dealings, the lives he's destroyed. But I can't use any of it, not yet. I'm facing deportation for a crime I didn't commit. Another one of Sterling's manipulations to keep me quiet." The pieces began falling into place in James's mind. "The cleaning lady's video." "Exactly." Marcus nodded. "For the first time, Sterling's true nature is exposed to the public. The timing couldn't be better. But I need help, Mr. Chen. I need someone who knows the company from the inside, someone who has nothing left to lose." James stood up, walking to his wall of clippings. Among them was a photo of Tommy smiling broadly on his 10th birthday. "What exactly are you proposing?" Marcus stood as well, his nervous energy transformed into determination. "I'm proposing we take him down, not with violence or illegal acts, but with the truth, all of it. Every life he's destroyed, every law he's broken, every person he's stepped on to build his empire, we make it all public. He's too powerful," James argued, but there was a hint of hope in his voice. "He has connections everywhere, judges, politicians, media outlets." "That's why we need more allies," Marcus replied. "The cleaning lady, Maria Santos, she's worked there for 15 years. Imagine what she's seen, what she knows, and now, thanks to that video, people are finally willing to listen." James turned to face Marcus, really looking at him for the first time. In the young man's eyes, he saw the same pain he carried, the same burning desire for justice. But there was something else too, a calculated intelligence, a careful planning that spoke of someone who had been working toward this moment for a long time. "Even if we succeed," James said slowly, "it won't bring back what we've lost." Marcus touched the broken watch gently. "No, it won't, but it might prevent others from losing what we did, and sometimes, Mr. Chen, that has to be enough." The laptop continued playing the viral video, Maria Santos's quiet defiance loop after loop. In that moment, something shifted in James's apartment, a change in the air, a sense of possibility, where before there had been only despair. "Tell me more," James said, pulling out a chair. "Tell me everything." As Marcus began to speak, neither man realized they were being watched. Across the street, in a parked car with tinted windows, someone was taking photographs, documenting their meeting. Sterling's empire might be facing its first public crisis, but the man at the top hadn't survived this long by being unprepared. The game was just beginning, and not everyone who seemed to be an ally could be trusted. Maxwell Sterling sat in his penthouse office, watching the city lights flicker below as darkness settled over the skyline. The viral video had amassed millions of views in just hours, and his phone hadn't stopped ringing. Investors, board members, media outlets, all demanding explanations, all threatening to withdraw their support. He swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass, his reflection distorted in its surface. The face that looked back at him wasn't the confident titan of industry he'd cultivated for decades. Instead, he saw echoes of his father, broken, desperate, defeated. "Sir," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ms. Chen from legal is here with the crisis management team." Sterling pressed the button. "Send them in." He stood, straightening his tie, smoothing his features into their usual mask of control. Samantha Chen entered first, followed by a team of lawyers and PR specialists. Her usually composed face showed signs of strain. "Mr. Sterling, we need to discuss damage control options." "What we need to discuss," Sterling cut in, "is how that video made it past our internal security protocols, and why you chose to interfere in a private matter between me and an employee." Samantha met his gaze steadily. "With all due respect, sir, physically grabbing an employee in front of witnesses isn't a private matter. It's assault. We're looking at potential criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and a PR nightmare that could tank our stock prices." Sterling slammed his glass down, liquid splashing onto the mahogany desk. "Then fix it. That's what I pay you for, isn't it? Buy her off, threaten her, whatever it takes." "It's not that simple anymore," one of the PR specialists interjected, a young woman with thick-rimmed glasses. "The video has sparked a movement. Just Sterling's shame isn't just about Mrs. Santos anymore. People are coming forward with other stories, former employees, contractors, even competing businesses. They're painting a pattern of..." "Enough," Sterling's gay voice boomed through the office. "I built this empire from nothing. I won't let it be destroyed by some cleaning woman and social media activists. Get me everything you can find on Maria Santos. Family, friends, finances, everything. There has to be something we can use." The room fell silent. Samantha Chen stepped forward, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Mr. Sterling, perhaps we should consider a different approach, a public apology, a commitment to change." Sterling's laugh was cold and sharp. Apologize? Show weakness? That's not how you maintain power, Ms. Chen. My father apologized. He begged for mercy when the banks came calling. Did it save him? Did it save our family name? He walked to the window, his back to the room. No. The world respects strength, nothing else. Then you leave us very few legal options, Samantha, replied, her voice tight. Sterling turned, a smile playing at his lips that made several team members step back. Then perhaps it's time to explore other options. He pressed the intercom again. Send in Mr. Blake. A moment later, a man entered the office. He wore an expensive suit, but there was something different about him, something harder, more dangerous than the corporate lawyers and PR specialists. His eyes scanned the room with predatory efficiency. Everyone out, Sterling commanded, except you, Blake. The team filed out, Samantha Chen lingering at the door. Mr. Sterling, whatever you're planning. That will be all, Ms. Chen. After. The door closed, Sterling turned to Blake. We have a situation that needs careful handling. Blake nodded, his expression unchanged. I'm aware of the video, sir. I've already begun preliminary surveillance on the targets. Targets, plural? Yes, sir, Mrs. Santos, of course, but there's something else you should know. Blake pulled out his phone, showing Sterling a series of photographs. James Chen, the former project manager whose son had the accident at our construction site, he's meeting with someone interesting. Sterling leaned closer, studying the images. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized the young man with the pocket watch. Rivera's boy. He's supposed to be facing deportation. Apparently, he's using his remaining time wisely, Blake replied. They've been meeting for hours, and they're not alone. He swiped to another photo, showing Samantha Chen entering the same building later that evening. Sterling's face darkened. So my head of legal is conspiring with them, interesting. He walked back to his desk, pressing a hidden button that revealed a wall safe. From it, he withdrew a thick file. Do you know why I've survived so long in this business, Blake? I assume it's because you're always prepared, sir. Exactly. Sterling opened the file, spreading photographs and documents across his desk. Everyone has secrets. Everyone has something to lose, even those who think they've already lost everything. He picked up a particular document, studying it with satisfaction. Get me everything you can on Marcus Rivera's deportation case. And, Blake, make sure our friends in law enforcement understand the importance of expediting the matter. And Mrs. Santos. Sterling's smile was cold. Let's show her exactly what happens when someone challenges the natural order of things. But be subtle. We don't need another viral video. As Blake left the office, Sterling returned to the window. Far below, the city continued its nighttime dance, unaware of the wheels being set in motion. He had built this empire by understanding one simple truth. Power wasn't just about money or influence. It was about being willing to do whatever it took to maintain control. Let them plot and scheme, he thought. Let them try to expose their so-called truth. They would soon learn that some secrets were better left buried, and some powers were too entrenched to fall. Maria Santos sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her phone in disbelief. The video had gone viral, spawning countless messages of support. News media requests and even a crowdfunding campaign started in her name. Her daughter Elena sat beside her, scrolling through the comments. Mama, you're trending. Look at all these people standing up for you. Elena squeezed her mother's hand. You've become a symbol of resistance against corporate abuse. Maria shook her head, still processing the day's events. I didn't want to become a symbol, I just couldn't take it anymore. She rubbed her wrist where Sterling's grip had left faint bruises. But now I'm afraid, men like Sterling, they don't just accept defeat. A knock at the door made both women jump. Elena moved to answer it, but Maria held her back. Wait. She approached the door cautiously, looking through the peephole. Her tension eased slightly when she recognized Samantha Chen, but there were others with her, a young man she didn't know and someone she recognized from the company's maintenance department. Opening the door, Maria found herself face to face with an unlikely group. Samantha spoke first, her professional demeanor softened by genuine concern. Mrs. Santos, I apologize for coming unannounced, but we need to talk. May we come in? Maria hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let them enter. The young man introduced himself as Marcus Rivera, while the maintenance worker was James Chen. As they gathered in her modest living room, Maria noticed how different they all were: the polished corporate lawyer, the earnest young immigrant, the grieving father, and herself, a cleaning lady who had finally said enough. "What's happening at the company?" Maria asked Samantha. "After you took me to file the incident report, I went home. I couldn't—" "It's chaos," Samantha replied. "Sterling is on the warpath. He's already trying to paint you as a disgruntled employee, claiming you've had performance issues. But that's not why we're here." She looked at Marcus, nodding for him to continue. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped around his ever-present pocket watch. "Mrs. Santos, what happened today wasn't just about a moment of cruelty. It was the tip of an iceberg that's been growing for decades. Sterling's empire is built on corruption, manipulation, and destroyed lives." Elena, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Like what happened to Tommy Chen?" All eyes turned to her. "I've been researching since the video went viral. There are so many stories, so many accusations that were buried or dismissed." James Chen's face tightened at the mention of his son's name. "Yes, Sterling's company cut corners on safety regulations. When accidents happened, they buried the evidence. They bought off investigators, threatened witnesses, whatever it took to protect their profits." Maria thought about her years of cleaning, Sterling's office late at night, the documents she'd glimpsed, the conversations she'd overheard. "I've seen things," she said slowly. "Documents left out, late-night meetings that didn't seem right. I never said anything because who would believe someone like me? Now they will," Samantha said firmly. "The video changed everything. People are watching, listening, but we need to move fast. Sterling won't just accept this challenge to his authority. He'll fight back, and he fights dirty." As if to emphasize her point, Maria's phone buzzed with a news alert. The color drained from her face as she read it. They're saying I have a history of making false accusations, that I've tried to extort money from previous employers. But that's not true. I've never—" "Classic Sterling tactics," Marcus growled. "He's trying to discredit you before you can do more damage." He pulled out a laptop, opening files filled with documents and photographs. "But we have something he doesn't expect. Evidence, years of it. Financial records, emails, testimony from people he's destroyed. We just needed the right moment, the right catalyst to make people listen." "And I'm that catalyst," Maria said quietly. "You're more than that," James interjected. "You're proof that standing up to him is possible. But you need to understand what you're facing. Sterling won't just try to discredit you. He'll try to destroy you, your family, everyone you care about." Elena took her mother's hand. "We won't let that happen. Look at how many people are supporting you already. He can't fight the whole world." Samantha's phone chimed with a message. Her expression turned grave as she read it. "He's moving faster than we expected. My sources say he's activated his network. Judges, police, media contacts. He's building a narrative to destroy all of us." "Then we move faster," Marcus declared. "Mrs. Santos, we need your help. Your testimony, your knowledge of the company's inner workings, combined with our evidence, it could be the key to bringing him down. But you have to be sure, once we start this fight, there's no turning back." Maria looked around the room at these unexpected allies, each carrying their own wounds from Sterling's cruelty. Then she looked at her daughter, seeing the pride and concern in Elena's eyes. For 15 years she had cleaned Sterling's offices, invisible and voiceless. Now finally, she had the chance to clean something much bigger, to wash away years of corruption and abuse. "Tell me what you need," she said, her voice steady and determined. "Tell me how we fight back." As the group began to plan, none of them noticed the small device planted under Maria's windowsill, its tiny red light blinking steadily, transmitting every word back to Sterling's watchdogs. The battle lines were being drawn, but some of the soldiers were already compromised, their loyalties divided by fear, greed, or a genuine belief that power must be preserved at any cost. The early morning sun hadn't yet reached the windows of the small coffee shop where Elena Santos sat, nervously checking her phone every few minutes. The place was mostly empty, save for a few early morning regulars and a man in the corner who seemed unusually interested in his newspaper. She jumped slightly when Marcus Rivera slid into the seat across from her, his familiar pocket watch clutched in his hand. "Sorry I'm late," he said softly. "Had to make sure I wasn't followed." "Is it really that serious?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. The past week had been a whirlwind of revelations and mounting pressure. Her mother had received threatening letters at home. Their internet connection had been mysteriously cutting out. Even Elena's university scholarship was suddenly under review. Marcus leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother's video was just the beginning. Sterling's trying to bury us in paperwork and intimidation, but we're making progress. People are coming forward, dozens of them. Former employees, business partners, even some current executives who can't stomach it anymore." Elena glanced around the coffee shop, suddenly very aware of their surroundings. "What about the evidence you mentioned? The documents proving Sterling's corruption? That's why I wanted to meet with you." Marcus pulled out a USB drive, sliding it across the table. "This contains copies of everything we've gathered, financial records, emails, internal memos, enough to expose decades of corruption. We need to keep backup copies in safe hands." Elena started to reach for the drive, but Marcus held onto it for a moment longer. "Elena, you need to understand something. If Sterling's people find out you have this—" "I know the risks," she interrupted, her jaw set in determination. "I've watched my mother clean other people's messes for 15 years, always with a smile, always saying yes sir and no sir. When I saw that video, saw her finally stand up to him," she took a deep breath. "I'm not afraid." Marcus studied her face, seeing the same quiet strength he'd noticed in Maria Santos. He released the drive. "Keep it somewhere safe. Don't access it unless absolutely necessary. And Elena?" His eyes met hers intently. "Trust no one. Sterling has people everywhere." As if to emphasize his point, the man with the newspaper stood up, walking past their table. Elena caught a glimpse of an earpiece in his ear before he disappeared through the door. "We should go," Marcus said quickly, but it was too late. Through the coffee shop's windows, they could see several men in suits approaching from different directions. Elena's heart raced as she slipped the drive into her bag. "What do we do?" Marcus's eyes darted around, assessing their options. "Kitchen exit, now." They moved quickly through the surprised staff, ignoring the shouts behind them. Marcus led them through the kitchen and out into the alley behind the coffee shop. The morning air was crisp, carrying the sounds of the city waking up. "This way," Marcus grabbed Elena's hand, pulling her toward the end of the alley, but as they rounded the corner, they nearly collided with James Chen. "Thank God," Elena breathed, but Marcus pushed her behind him. "How did you know we'd be here?" he demanded, studying James's face carefully. James held up his hands. "Samantha warned me. Sterling's people are closing in. They're planning to arrest you, Marcus. Some trumped-up charge about corporate espionage. And Elena, they're going to try to use you to get to your mother." Elena clutched her bag tighter, feeling the weight of the USB drive. "What about my mom? Is she safe?" "For now, Samantha has her somewhere secure, but we need to move." James glanced over his shoulder. "I have a car 2 blocks from here. We can—" "Wait," Marcus interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "How did Samantha know about this meeting? I didn't tell anyone except—" His hand tightened around his pocket watch. "The coffee shop. It was the only place they could have overheard us planning this." James's expression changed almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something, regret, fear, crossed his face. "Marcus, we don't have time for paranoia. Those men will be here any second." But Marcus was already backing away, pulling Elena with him. "You were supposed to be at your daughter's grave this morning. That's what you told me yesterday. That's why we scheduled the meeting for this time." The sound of footsteps echoed from both ends of the alley. James's face hardened. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "They have evidence about Tommy's accident. Real evidence. They promised if I helped them—" "You betrayed us?" Elena's voice cracked with disbelief. "I betrayed Sterling," James shot back. 15 years ago, I could have exposed him, could have fought for justice for Tommy, but I was a coward. I took their money, their silence, living with that shame on. He shook his head. At least this way, I get to know the truth. The footsteps were getting closer. Marcus looked at Elena, making a split-second decision. Run! The subway station, 3 blocks south. Go! Elena hesitated for a moment, then turned and ran. Behind her, she could hear shouts and the sound of a scuffle. The USB drive bounced against her hip as she ran, carrying with it the weight of all their hopes and fears. She didn't look back, didn't stop running until she was lost in the morning crowd of commuters, her heart pounding and tears streaming down her face. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Trust no one. Wait for my signal. M. Somewhere in the city, a clock struck 8, its chimes echoing through the streets like a warning. The game had changed, the stakes raised higher than ever. And Elena Santos, who had only wanted to protect her mother, found herself at the center of a storm that threatened to tear apart everything she held dear. Samantha Chen stood in her office at Empire Enterprises, watching the sun set over the city skyline. The events of the morning weighed heavily on her mind. Marcus's arrest, Elena's narrow escape, James's betrayal. Her computer screen displayed multiple news feeds, all reporting on the corporate espionage scandal engulfing the company. A soft knock at her door made her turn. Blake stood there, his expression unreadable as always. Miss Chen, Mr. Sterling would like to see you. She gathered, her files, her mind racing. Had they discovered her role? Did they know about Maria's hiding place? She followed Blake to Sterling's penthouse office, her heels clicking against the marble floors like a countdown. Sterling was standing at his usual spot by the window, but he wasn't alone. James Chen sat in one of the leather chairs, looking, smaller somehow, diminished. On the desk between them lay a familiar pocket watch. Ah, Samantha, Sterling smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I believe congratulations are in order. The Rivera boys' arrest should put an end to this unfortunate business. Samantha kept her face neutral. The press seems to be accepting our narrative about corporate espionage, though there are still concerns about the viral video. Yes, about that. Sterling walked to his desk, picking up the pocket watch. Mr. Chen here has been most helpful in containing the situation. It seems our young friend Mr. Rivera was planning to release quite a collection of sensitive documents. Documents that, interestingly, seem to have required high-level access to obtain. His eyes fixed on Samantha, the kind of access only someone in legal would have. Samantha's heart raced, but years of corporate negotiations had taught her how to maintain composure. Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Sterling? Not at all. He smiled again, colder this time. I'm offering you an opportunity, the same opportunity I offered James here. He gestured to the broken man in the chair. A chance to choose the right side of history. And what side is that? Sterling's face hardened. The side that wins, Miss Chen. The side that understands that power isn't about right or wrong, it's about strength and weakness. About knowing when to stand firm and when to... He glanced at James. Bend. Samantha looked at James, who wouldn't meet her eyes. What did they offer you? She asked him softly. The truth, James whispered. About Tommy. About what really happened that day. Sterling interrupted smoothly. The past is the past, Mr. Chen. What matters now is the future. Speaking of which... He pressed a button on his desk and Blake stepped forward with a tablet. Ms. Chen, I have something you might find interesting. The tablet displayed photos, surveillance images of her meeting with Maria Santos, of her late-night conversations with Marcus, of dozens of small moments she thought had been private. But the last photo made her blood run cold. It showed her sister's small restaurant in Chinatown, the one their parents had spent their life savings to build. Lovely place, Sterling said casually. Health inspectors can be so thorough these days. One bad report could shut a place down for weeks, and those loans from our subsidiary bank, they can be called in at any time. The threat was clear. Samantha thought of her sister, of her aging parents who had sacrificed everything for their children's success. She thought of Maria Santos, hiding in the safe house, trusting her. She thought of Elena, running through the city with evidence that could bring down an empire. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Sterling sat behind his desk, the picture of corporate authority. "Your loyalty, Ms. Chen, your skills, your dedication to maintaining order. In return, your family's business remains safe, and you continue your impressive career trajectory." He paused. "The alternative? Well, ask Mr. Chen about alternatives." James flinched visibly. Samantha noticed fresh bruises on his wrists, partially hidden by his shirt sleeves. "You have until morning to decide," Sterling continued. "To show good faith, you'll tell me where Maria Santos is hiding. Think of it as a down payment on your future." Samantha's mind raced through scenarios, calculations, possibilities. The weight of her choices pressed down on her like a physical force. In law school, they had talked about justice, about right and wrong. But in the real world, she was learning, things were rarely so clear. "I'll need time to consider my options," she said carefully. Sterling nodded, satisfied. "Of course, Blake will escort you home. For your safety, you understand. These are dangerous times." As she turned to leave, Sterling called out, "Oh, and Samantha, don't try to warn them. Mr. Chen made that mistake earlier today. Didn't you?" "James." James's hands trembled as he touched his bruised wrists. In the elevator, accompanied by Blake's silent presence, Samantha felt the walls of her carefully constructed world closing in. The choices before her seemed impossible. Betray her principles or destroy her family's dreams. Protect her allies or protect her loved ones. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage, and as she walked to her car, she caught her reflection in the window. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, harder, more haunted. She thought of Maria Santos, standing up to Sterling with nothing but her dignity. She thought of Elena, running through the city with the truth in her bag. She thought of Marcus, now sitting in a jail cell because he dared to fight back. As Blake opened her car door, she made her decision. Sometimes, she realized, the only way to win was to change the rules of the game entirely. She just hoped she would live long enough to see it through. Maria Santos sat in the small apartment's living room, watching the evening news with growing horror. The reporter spoke in measured tones about Marcus Rivera's arrest for corporate espionage, painting him as a disgruntled immigrant trying to destroy a respected American company. The story then shifted to troubling questions about her own past, complete with interviews from supposed former employers she'd never worked for. "Turn it off," she told her host, an elderly woman named Rose Chen, James's mother, who had agreed to hide her despite the risks. Rose clicked off the television, her weathered hands trembling slightly. "They're trying to destroy you," Rose said quietly, setting down her tea, "just like they destroyed my grandson's future." She walked to a shelf filled with family photos, touching one of young Tommy. "My son, James, he thinks making deals with Sterling will bring him peace. But there is no peace in betrayal." Maria wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the weight of guilt. "I've brought danger to your home. If they find me here, let them come," Rose interrupted with surprising steel in her voice. "I've been silent too long, we all have." She sat next to Maria, taking her hand. "When Tommy was taken from us, I watched my son break. He took their money, their silence. I said nothing, thinking it would help him heal, but some wounds don't heal when covered with gold, they just fester." A soft knock at the door made both women freeze. Rose moved to answer it, but Maria pulled her back, remembering Marcus's warnings about trust. They waited in tense silence until a voice whispered through the door. "Mrs. Chen, it's Elena. Please, I need help." Maria rushed to the door, checking through the peephole before quickly letting her daughter in. Elena stumbled inside, exhausted and disheveled, her bag clutched tightly to her chest. "Elena, what happened? Are you hurt?" "I'm okay, Mama." Elena hugged her mother fiercely. "But Marcus, they arrested him. And Mr. Chen, he betrayed us. He was working with Sterling's people." She pulled back, opening her bag to reveal the USB drive. But I got it. All the evidence, everything they need to expose Sterling. Rose had been watching the reunion quietly, but now she stepped forward. You can't stay here. They'll be watching my home. James, he knows I sometimes help people in trouble. Where can we go? Maria asked. They'll be watching everything. Hotels, friends' homes, even shelters. A new knock at the door made them all jump. This time the voice was Samantha Chen's. Mrs. Chen, Maria, please, I know you're in there. We don't have much time. Elena moved to block the door. We can't trust her. She works for Sterling. But Rose was already moving to answer it. Sometimes, child, the only way to know who to trust is to risk trusting. She opened the door to reveal Samantha, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, her usual corporate polish replaced by urgent fear. They're coming, Samantha said without preamble. Sterling's men are on their way. They followed me, but I managed to lose them for a few minutes. She looked at Elena. Do you have the drive? Elena clutched her bag tighter. Why should we trust you? Because I just burned every bridge I have, Samantha replied. Sterling offered me a deal. Betray you in exchange for my family's safety. He's going to destroy my sister's restaurant, my parents' life work. She laughed bitterly. But you know what? I realized something watching that video of you, Maria. Sometimes standing up isn't a choice. It's a necessity. Rose moved to her bedroom, returning with a small box. There's a place, she said, opening the box to reveal an old key and a photograph. After Tommy, I knew someday we might need somewhere safe. Somewhere Sterling wouldn't think to look. The photo showed a small cabin by a lake. It belonged to my late husband's family. It's not in my name, not in James's name. As far as the world is concerned, it doesn't exist. Samantha checked her phone, her expression tightening. Whatever. We're going to do, we need to do it now. They're getting closer. Maria looked at her daughter, at the drive that contained their hopes for justice, at Rose with her offering of sanctuary, at Samantha who had chosen to risk everything. In that moment, she understood that their fight had grown beyond her simple act of defiance. It had become something larger, something that could either break them all or become the force that finally brought down Sterling's empire of fear. The cabin, she decided, but not all of us. They'll be watching for groups. She turned to Samantha. Can you create a distraction? Make them think we're heading somewhere else? Samantha nodded. I can book flights, hotel rooms, leave electronic trails. It won't fool them for long, but it might buy you some time. I'm coming with you, Elena insisted. No, Maria said firmly. You need to get that drive somewhere safe, somewhere public. Marcus told me about his backup plan, about the journalist he trusted. Elena's eyes widened. Sarah Martinez at the Global Herald, but how did you... Marcus and I talked that day after the video. He knew something like this might happen. Maria hugged her daughter. Go to her. Show her everything. Make them. Listen. Rose was already packing a small bag with essentials. I'll take Maria to the cabin. They won't suspect an old woman and her friend going for a quiet weekend. Samantha's phone buzzed again. They're here. 2 black SUVs just turned onto the street. The women moved quickly, years of practice at efficiency serving them well. Within minutes, they had separated the evidence, created duplicate drives, packed bare essentials. As they prepared to leave through different exits, Rose touched the photo of Tommy one last time. James lost his way trying to find peace through vengeance, she said softly. Perhaps we can find it through justice instead. They split up. Eleanor through the back alley toward the newspaper offices, Samantha through the front to create her distraction, and Maria with Rose through the building's service entrance toward a waiting taxi. As they separated, Maria thought about how her simple refusal to bend had sparked this moment, this gathering of unlikely allies united against a common enemy. Sterling had built his empire on the assumption that everyone had a price, that principles would always bow to pressure. But he had forgotten something crucial. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one fighting for revenge or power, but the one fighting simply because they can no longer bear to kneel. The Global Herald's newsroom hummed with late-night energy when Elena Santos slipped through the security entrance, her heart pounding. Sarah Martinez's desk was easy to spot, the only one still occupied at this hour, illuminated by a single desk lamp as the veteran journalist worked on her. Latest exposé, Sarah Martinez. Elena approached cautiously, remembering Marcus's instructions. Marcus Rivera sent me. He said to tell you the watch stopped at midnight. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. Where is Marcus? Arrested. Sterling's. People got to him, but not before he gave me this. Elena placed the USB drive on the desk. Everything's here. The corruption, the cover-ups, the evidence about Tommy Chen's accident. Years of Sterling destroying lives. Sarah plugged in the drive, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she began examining the files. Her eyes widened. As she scrolled through document after document, this is incredible. Financial records, internal memos, emails. She looked up at Elena. Do you understand what you're carrying? This isn't just evidence of corruption. This is proof of systematic abuse of power going back decades. Can you publish it? Not yet. Sarah held up a hand as Elena started to protest. We need to verify everything, establish multiple sources. Sterling's lawyers would bury us if we rushed this. She leaned back, studying Elena thoughtfully. But there's something else we can do. Tell me about your mother. Meanwhile, across town, Sterling paced in his office, his usual composure cracking. How did you lose them? He demanded into his phone. 3 women and a girl. How hard can it be to track them? Blake's voice was tense. They split up. Chen's credit card shows hotel bookings in 3 different cities. The old woman's car was seen heading north, and we're getting reports of Elena Santos near the newspaper district. The newspapers, Sterling muttered. Focus on the girl. Whatever evidence Rivera gave her, we need it contained. He hung up, turning to James Chen, who sat silently in the corner. Your mother. Where would she take them? James stared at his hands. I don't know. Don't lie to me. Sterling slammed his fist on the desk. You betrayed them. Your own mother, your friend's daughter. The least you can do is finish the job. I betrayed them because you promised me the truth about Tommy, James said quietly. So tell me what really happened. To my son. Sterling's face softened into a practiced mask of sympathy. James, we've been through this. It was a tragic accident. The report clearly showed... Stop lying. James stood suddenly, his voice rising. I did everything you asked. I helped you track them. I betrayed people who trusted me. I deserve the truth. Sterling studied him for a long moment, then pressed a button on his desk. Blake entered silently, standing by the door. You want the truth, James. The truth is that your son was never supposed to be at that construction site. The truth is that he saw things he shouldn't have seen, documents being destroyed, evidence being removed. James sank back into his chair, the color draining from his face. No. The truth, Sterling continued relentlessly, is that accidents are sometimes necessary for the greater good, for maintaining order. You understood that once, when you took our money, when you chose security over justice. I didn't know, James whispered. I never thought... And now you do know. So what are you going to do about it? Sterling leaned forward. Your mother is hiding Maria Santos. Elena has evidence that could destroy everything. Are you going to let your son's sacrifice be for nothing? James stood slowly, his face transformed by a new understanding. No, he said softly. No more sacrifices. He turned toward the door. Where do you think you're going? To do what I should have done 15 years ago. James looked back at Sterling. To tell the truth. Blake moved to block the door, but Sterling held up his hand. Let him go. He has no proof, no evidence. Just the ramblings of a grieving father. He smiled coldly. Besides, accidents happen every day in this city. As James left the office, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Global Herald, 1 hour, bring the watch. S. Across the city, Sarah Martinez was building a story. Not just about corruption and power, but about the human cost of greed. About a cleaning lady who stood up to a titan. About a young immigrant fighting for justice. About a father consumed by grief and guilt. "We need to move fast," she told Elena, still typing furiously. "Sterling's influence runs deep, but he has one weakness. He can't control social media. He can't stop people from sharing their stories." She looked up with a fierce smile. "And I have a plan to exploit that weakness." Elena leaned forward. "What do you need me to do?" "Tell me everything. Every detail. Every moment. People connected with your mother's video because it was real, raw, human. We need to keep that connection alive. While I verify the evidence, we'll tell the stories. All of them. Tommy Chen, Marcus Rivera's father. Every life Sterling has destroyed. He'll try to stop you." "Of course he will." Sarah's smile grew sharper. "That's exactly what we're counting on, because this time, the whole world will be watching." In the cabin by the lake, Maria Santos and Rose Chen sat in companionable silence, watching the sun set over the water. Maria's phone, a burner provided by Samantha, buzzed with a message. "It's beginning. Hope you're ready for round 2. Rose squeezed Maria's hand. "Are you afraid?" Maria thought about her daughter, carrying the truth to the world, about Marcus paying the price for his courage, about Samantha risking everything for what was right, about James trapped between guilt and redemption. "No," she said finally. "Not anymore." She stood, walking to the window. "Sterling thinks power comes from making people afraid, but real power comes from helping people find their courage." As night fell over the city, the pieces were moving. A father seeking redemption, a journalist preparing for battle, a daughter carrying truth like a torch, and at the center of it all, a cleaning lady who had dared to say no. The storm was coming, and this time they were ready. Sarah Martinez's article hit the Global Herald's website at exactly midnight. Within minutes, Sterling Crimes was trending nationwide. The story wasn't just about corporate corruption, it was about human lives, told through a series of interconnected narratives that began with a cleaning lady's act of defiance and spiraled outward into a web of decades-long abuse of power. In his penthouse office, Sterling watched the story spread across social media, platforms with growing fury. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, board members, investors, politicians suddenly wanting to distance themselves from any association with him. But it was the photographs accompanying the article that truly shook him. There, in crisp digital clarity, was his own handwriting on documents that should have been destroyed years ago. Construction site safety reports with his signature authorizing substandard materials. Emails ordering the manipulation of evidence after Tommy Chen's accident. Financial records showing systematic bribery of officials. "Find them," he shouted into his phone. "I don't care what it takes. Find Santos, find the girl, find everyone involved in this leak." But even as he raged, more stories were breaking. Other news outlets picked up the Global Herald story, adding their own investigations. Former employees began speaking out, their faces and names no longer hidden in shadow. The dam had broken, and 15 years of secrets were flooding out. At the Global Herald's offices, Elena Santos watched the story spread, while Sarah Martinez continued typing furiously at her desk. "They're saying this could be bigger than Watergate," Elena said, scrolling through her phone. "People are organizing protests outside Sterling's buildings across the country." Sarah barely looked up from her screen. "Sterling's going to retaliate. Hard. He's not going to let his empire crumble without a fight." She paused, fixing Elena with a serious look. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Before Elena could answer, James Chen burst into the newsroom, security guards close behind him. "Wait," Sarah called out to the guards. "He's an important source. Let him through." James approached their desk, looking haggard but determined. He placed Marcus's pocket watch on Sarah's desk. "I'm ready to tell everything. About Tommy. About the cover-up. About Sterling's direct involvement. No more hiding." Sarah pulled out a recorder. "Start from the beginning." Meanwhile, at the lakeside cabin, Maria and Rose watched the news unfold on a small tablet. Rose gasped as her son's face appeared on the screen, publicly testifying about the truth behind Tommy's accident. "Oh, James," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "Finally." Maria's burner phone buzzed, a message from Samantha. "Sterling's coming apart. Board of Directors calling emergency meeting. But watch out. He's sending people to find you. Stay." Hidden. As if on cue, they heard the sound of vehicles on the gravel road leading to the cabin. Rose moved quickly to the window, peering through the curtains. "2 black SUVs, she reported grimly, "just like the ones that followed us in the city." Maria's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Is there another way out?" Rose nodded, moving to a corner of the cabin and pulling up a loose floorboard. "The basement has a tunnel that leads to the boathouse. My husband built it years ago, said everyone needs an escape route." She smiled sadly. "I never thought we'd actually need it." They could hear footsteps on the porch now, voices calling out. Maria grabbed their emergency bags, while Rose quickly erased all signs of their presence. As they descended into the basement, Maria's phone buzzed one final time, a message from Elena. "Mum, whatever happens, don't worry about me. We're winning." The basement was dark and smelled of earth and old wood. Rose led the way through the narrow tunnel, their path lit only by the dim glow of their phones. Above them, they could hear the sound of the cabin door being broken open, heavy footsteps moving across the floor. "My James," Rose whispered as they hurried through the darkness. "He's finally chosen the right path. Even if it's dangerous, even if Sterling retaliates, at least he's finally standing up for the truth." Maria squeezed the older woman's hand. "The truth has a way of demanding to be heard. I learned that the day I refused to bend." They emerged in the boathouse, just as shouts of frustration echoed from the cabin. Rose moved with surprising speed for her age, untying a small motorboat while Maria kept watch. Within minutes, they were gliding across the dark lake, leaving Sterling's men to search an empty cabin. Back in the city, the story continued to explode. Sarah Martinez's article had opened the floodgates, but it was the personal stories that captivated people. The cleaning lady who said no, the grieving father seeking redemption, the young immigrant fighting for justice. Social media was flooded with similar stories from others who had suffered under Sterling's reign, each one adding another crack to his crumbling facade. In his office, Sterling watched his empire beginning to unravel. Board members were calling for his resignation. Shareholders were demanding emergency meetings. Politicians who had once courted his favor were now calling for investigations. But Sterling had built his power on more than just money and influence. He had built it on fear. And he still had one card left to play. "Get me everything we have on Sarah Martinez," he commanded Blake. "Every secret, every weakness. And find out who's helping Santos and the others. Someone's coordinating this. Someone's protecting them. Find them." Blake hesitated for the first time in years of service. "Sir, perhaps we should consider damage control instead. The evidence they're releasing. Evidence can be discredited. Witnesses can be silenced. Stories can be buried." Sterling's eyes had a dangerous gleam. "I didn't build this empire by surrendering at the first sign of resistance." As midnight approached, the city hummed with tension. In newsrooms and boardrooms, on social media and in the streets, a battle was being waged between truth and power, between courage and fear. And somewhere on a dark lake, 2 women who had dared to stand up against a titan made their way toward an uncertain dawn. The emergency board meeting of Empire Enterprises began at dawn, the first rays of sunlight streaming through the windows of the conference room. Sterling sat at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by the events of the past 24 hours. Around him, board members whispered and cast nervous glances at their phones, where news alerts continued to pour in. "This is a witch hunt," Sterling declared, his voice still carrying that note of authority that had served him so well for so long. "A coordinated attack by disgruntled former employees and attention-seeking journalists. Our legal team will handle it." "Like they handled this?" One of the board members, Patricia Walsh, slid her tablet across the table. On it was a new article. From the Global Herald, complete with James Chen's full testimony about Tommy's accident. "Mr. Sterling, this isn't just bad press. These are serious criminal allegations, backed by substantial evidence." Before Sterling could respond, the door opened and Samantha Chen walked in, followed by a team of stern-faced individuals. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," she announced, her voice steady, "I'm here with representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They have some questions about certain financial irregularities that have come to light." Sterling's face darkened. "Ms. Chen, you're fired. Security will escort you out." "Actually," one of the SEC representatives stepped forward. "Ms. Chen is here in her capacity as a whistleblower. She's been cooperating with our investigation for the past 12 hours. The boardroom erupted in chaos. Sterling tried to maintain control, but he could see it slipping away. Board members were already edging toward the door, their lawyers, advising them to distance themselves from the growing scandal. Meanwhile, in a small coffee shop across town, Elena Santos sat with Sarah Martinez, watching the story continue to unfold. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with new tips, new witnesses coming forward. "Your mother's video was the key," Sarah explained, showing Elena the analytics. "It put a human face on Sterling's abuse of power. Once people saw that, they couldn't look away, and now—" She gestured to her screen where Dares Takedown Sterling was trending worldwide. Elena's phone chimed with a message from Marcus, who had been released from custody as the evidence of Sterling's corruption mounted. "Meeting you at the Herald in 20. Big news." When Marcus arrived, he wasn't alone. With him was a distinguished-looking older man who made Elena's heart skip a beat. He looked exactly like an aged version of Marcus. "Elena," Marcus said softly, "I'd like you to meet my father, Antonio Rivera." Antonio Rivera had emerged from hiding as soon as the story broke, bringing with him another treasure trove of evidence from the early days of Empire Enterprises. "I've been watching, waiting. For the right moment," he explained, his accent thick with emotion. "When I saw your mother stand up to Sterling, it reminded me of why I saved all this." He patted a thick briefcase. "Sometimes the biggest acts of courage inspire others to be brave too." Across the city, in a secure location, Maria and Rose watched the news coverage with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The story had grown far beyond Maria's simple act of defiance, becoming a movement that threatened to bring down not just Sterling, but an entire system of corporate abuse and corruption. "Look," Rose pointed to the screen, where James was being interviewed live on national television. He looked different, stronger, more certain of himself than he had in years. He was talking about Tommy, about the cover-up, about his own role in maintaining Sterling's wall of silence. "I protected the man who was responsible for my son's accident," James said, his voice breaking. "I took their money, their silence. I became part of the system that destroyed my own family. But today I'm choosing a different path. Today I'm choosing truth." The interview was interrupted by breaking news. Sterling's board of directors had voted to suspend him pending investigation. The SEC was executing search warrants at Empire Enterprises offices across the country, and more witnesses were coming forward, including Blake, Sterling's longtime enforcer. Maria's burner phone buzzed with a message from Samantha. "Sterling's cornered, but that makes him dangerous. Stay hidden, almost over." Rose touched Maria's hand. "When Tommy was taken from us, I thought our family would never heal. But sometimes healing doesn't come from forgetting or moving on. Sometimes it comes from standing up, from refusing to let others suffer the same pain." Maria nodded, thinking of her own journey from silent submission to reluctant symbol of resistance. "I never wanted to be a hero," she said quietly. "I just couldn't kneel anymore." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," Rose replied. "The ones who fight for power, for glory, they're not the real heroes. It's the ones who stand up simply because they must, because their conscience gives them no other choice." In his Tastinu increasingly empty office, Sterling watched his empire crumbling in real time. Board members resigned one by one. Stock prices plummeted. Old allies declined his calls. But he had one last card to play, one final desperate attempt to maintain control. As the sun set on a day that had changed everything, the pieces were still moving. a father finding redemption through truth, a daughter carrying her mother's courage forward, a young man reunited with his long-lost father, a community discovering its voice. And somewhere in the city, a man who had built his power on others' fear was about to discover that fear, once broken, could never be rebuilt. The tide had turned, and not even the mighty Maxwell Sterling could hold back the flood of truth that was about to wash away his empire of lies. Sterling stood in his penthouse office, watching the protesters gather in the streets below. Their signs and chants called for justice, for accountability for his resignation. But they couldn't understand that power once gained could never be surrendered gracefully. "Sir," Blake entered the office, his usual confidence replaced by obvious unease. "The SEC agents are requesting access to the secure servers, and the board, they're not just suspending you anymore. They're voting to remove you permanently." Sterling didn't turn from the window. "And what about our contingency plan?" "It's ready. But sir, if we go through with this, there's no coming back. The damage to the company, to everyone involved." "The company?" Sterling finally turned, his laugh bitter and cold. "I am the company, Blake. Everything it is, everything it achieved, it's all because of me. And if they want to take it away," his eyes gleamed with dangerous intensity, "then let them deal with the consequences." Across town, in the Global Herald's newsroom, Sarah Martinez was piecing together the final parts of the puzzle. Antonio Rivera sat beside her, going through decades-old documents, while Elena and Marcus cross-referenced data on their laptops. "Look at this," Antonio suddenly said, pulling out a yellow document. "The original partnership agreement between Sterling and me. There's a clause here about contingency procedures in case of dissolution." Sarah leaned over, her eyes widening as she read. He wouldn't dare." "What is it?" Elena asked. "A scorched earth protocol," Antonio explained grimly. "If the company faces hostile takeover or forced dissolution, all assets can be liquidated, all accounts frozen, all contracts terminated simultaneously. It would create a financial tsunami, affecting not just Empire Enterprises, but hundreds of smaller companies, thousands of employees." Marcus grabbed his phone. "I'm calling Samantha. She needs to know about this." But Samantha was already discovering Sterling's plan firsthand. In the company's legal offices, she watched in horror as alerts began popping up on her screen. Massive transfers being initiated, contracts being flagged for immediate termination, automated systems beginning shutdown procedures. "He's doing it," she whispered, frantically typing commands to try to stop the cascade. "He's bringing down everything." Her phone rang. James Chen. "Samantha, something's happening at the construction sites. All safety systems are going offline. Emergency. Protocols are failing. We have thousands of workers out there." "Listen carefully," she cut in. "Get everyone out now. Sterling's activated some kind of kill switch. We don't know how far it goes." Back in the newsroom, Sarah's team was racing against time. Antonio dug deeper into the old agreements, looking for a way to stop the protocol. Elena coordinated with other news outlets, making sure the public understood what was happening. Marcus worked with tech experts, trying to breach the company's systems. "There has to be a way to stop it," Elena insisted. "Some kind of override." "Wait." Antonio held up the pocket watch he had given Marcus years ago. "The watch. I always told Marcus it symbolized the time that was stolen from us, but it's more than that." He opened the back of the watch, revealing a small key. "This was my failsafe, a physical key that, when paired with the right codes, can override any major system changes." Marcus stared at his father. "You knew all these years?" "I suspected Sterling might someday try something like this. It's why I never used it before. It only works once. After that, the entire system would have to be rebuilt." Antonio's hands trembled slightly. "But I never imagined he would go this far." Sarah was already making calls. "We need to get this key to Samantha. She's the only one with high enough access to use it." But as they formulated their plan, Sterling was making his final moves. In his office, he watched the chaos spreading. With a kind of detached satisfaction, Markets were already reacting to the news of Empire Enterprises' imminent collapse. Smaller companies connected to the Empire were seeing their stocks plummet. "Sir," Blake entered again, his face ashen. "The police are in the lobby. They have warrants, and the protesters. They're breaking through the security barriers." Sterling smiled, a cold expression that held no warmth. "Let them come. By the time they reach this office, there won't be anything left to save." In the building's legal department, Samantha worked frantically to slow the digital destruction. Beside her, James Chen coordinated with emergency services, trying to prevent Sterling's scorched earth policy from claiming any lives. "The construction sites are clear," he reported, "but the financial damage, pensions, savings, jobs, he's destroying everything." Samantha's phone lit up with a message from Sarah Martinez. "We have a way to stop this, but we need you, and we need to hurry." Outside, the streets filled with more protesters as news of Sterling's final gambit spread. Police struggled to maintain order as angry employees, investors, and citizens demanded justice. TV crews broadcast the chaos live across the nation, and somewhere on the road back to the city, Maria Santos watched it all unfold on her phone, Rose Chen beside her in the car. "We have to go back," Maria said quietly. "This started with my stand against him. I need to be there when it ends." Rose nodded, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons or money, but with the simple courage to stand up and say, "Enough." As they drove toward the growing storm, Maria thought about how her single act of defiance had sparked this moment. She had refused to kneel, refused to accept one more humiliation, and now that small spark had grown into a fire that threatened to either cleanse or consume Sterling's empire. The final battle was beginning, and this time, the whole world was watching. The streets around Empire Enterprises' headquarters had become a war zone of protests and panic. Police barriers strained against crowds of angry employees and investors, while news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the chaos live. Inside the building's lobby, Sarah Martinez and her team fought their way through the confusion. "Ms. Martinez," a security guard recognized her. "The building's being evacuated. Systems are failing everywhere." "We need to get to the legal department," she insisted, showing him Antonio's key. "This can stop it." The guard hesitated, then nodded, leading them through emergency stairwells as the elevators had been shut down. Antonio Rivera struggled with the stairs, but his determination never wavered. Marcus supported his father, while Elena coordinated with Samantha via phone. "How bad is it?" Eleanor asked. Samantha's voice crackled with static and stress. "Sterling's protocol is spreading faster than we can contain it. It's not just affecting our systems anymore, it's reaching into partner companies, suppliers, contractors. The whole network is collapsing." On the executive floor, Sterling watched multiple screens showing the destruction he had unleashed. Stock tickers ran red with losses. Emergency alerts flashed from facilities worldwide. His empire was burning, but he had ensured that its fall would shake the foundations of the entire financial district. "Sir," Blake stood at the door, his loyalty finally wavering. "The police are on their way up. We need to go." "Go where?" Sterling laughed, a hollow sound. "There's nowhere left to hide, Blake, but I can at least ensure that no one else gets to sit on this throne." In the legal department, Samantha and James worked frantically to slow the digital destruction. Screens around them showed the cascade of failing systems, safety protocols going offline, financial safeguards crumbling, years of data being corrupted. "The construction sites are completely shut down," James reported grimly. "Thousands to have workers displaced. And the pension fund, they're being drained into offshore accounts." "He's not just destroying the company," Samantha realized. "He's stealing everything he can on the way down." The stairwell door burst open as Sarah's team arrived, breathless from their climb. Antonio immediately moved to Samantha's computer, his hands shaking as he held out the watch. "The key needs to be inserted into a specific port," he explained quickly. "Then we need to input a series of commands, codes I embedded in the original system architecture 25 years ago." "Will it stop everything?" Elena asked. "It'll stop the protocol, freeze all transactions, lock down the systems." Antonio's fingers flew over the keyboard. But we have to hurry. Once the corruption reaches the core servers, an alarm blared through the building. James's phone lit up with urgent messages. The core servers, they're in the basement, and the cooling systems just went offline. If they overheat, all the evidence, all the backups, everything would be lost, Samantha finished. Sarah turned to her team. Eleanor, stay with Antonio and Samantha. Help them implement the override. Marcus, James, we need to get to those servers. As they rushed to split up, the elevator doors opened. Maria Santos stepped out, followed by Rose Chen. The sight of her mother stopped Elena in her tracks. Mama, what are you doing here? This started with me, Maria said firmly. I need to see it end. She looked around at the chaos, the failing systems, the people fighting to save what they could. What can I do to help? Before anyone could answer, a new alarm sounded. Fire alerts from multiple floors. Blake's voice came over the building's intercom system. This is a mandatory evacuation. All personnel must exit the building immediately. This is not a drill. He's covering his tracks, Samantha realized. If the building's systems fail completely, if the servers are destroyed, then all the evidence burns with them, Sarah finished. The group split into two teams. Sarah, Marcus, and James headed for the basement servers, while Samantha, Antonio, and Eleanor worked on implementing the override. Maria and Rose stayed to help coordinate with emergency services and handle the growing crowd of evacuating employees. In his office, Sterling watched the pieces fall into place. The fire. Alerts would force an evacuation. The server failure would destroy the evidence, and in the confusion he could disappear. He had accounts waiting, identities prepared. He could rebuild somewhere else, start over. A small sound made him turn. In his doorway stood the cleaning lady who had started it all. Maria Santos looked at him not with fear or anger, but with something worse, pity. Your empire is falling, Mr. Sterling, she said quietly, but it doesn't have to destroy everyone else in the process. Sterling's laugh was bitter. You think you've won? You think your little act of defiance changed anything? Power doesn't bow to dignity, Mrs. Santos. It doesn't yield to moral stands. No, Maria agreed, stepping into the office. Power doesn't bow to anything, but people can choose to stop bowing to power. Behind her, more figures appeared. Elena, Samantha, Antonio with his watch and key. Below, Sarah's team raced against time to save the servers. Outside, the crowds grew larger, their voices stronger, and all around them, Sterling's carefully constructed walls of fear and control continued to crumble. The final confrontation was beginning, and this time, there would be nowhere left to hide. The air in Sterling's office crackled with tension as Maria Santos stood her ground, facing the man who had once made her kneel. Behind her, Antonio Rivera worked feverishly with Samantha Chen, attempting to input the override codes that could stop the cascading destruction of the Empire's systems. You're still just a cleaning lady, Sterling sneered, his composed facade cracking. You think standing here now makes you powerful? You think any of this makes a difference? This isn't about power, Mr. Sterling, Maria replied calmly. It's about dignity, something you never understood. Elena watched her mother with pride, remembering the viral video that had started it all, how far they had come from that moment of defiance in the lobby. Meanwhile, in the basement, Sarah Martinez, Marcus, and James Chen fought their way through, rising heat and failing systems to reach the core servers. The temperature was becoming unbearable as the cooling systems continued to fail. We need to stabilize the environment, James shouted over the sound of alarms. Otherwise, even if they manage the override upstairs, we'll lose everything. Marcus spotted emergency cooling equipment in a corner. Help me with this. We can rig a temporary system. Back in the office, Antonio's hands flew over the keyboard while Samantha guided him through the company's modern security layers. The protocols are shifting, she reported tensely. Sterling's programmed them to adapt, to resist intervention. He always was afraid of losing control, Antonio muttered, his fingers never stopping. That's why he betrayed me in the first place. Sterling moved toward his desk, but Elena stepped in his way. Don't, she warned. It's over. The police are coming up. The evidence is being secured. Your empire is finished. You naive child, Sterling laughed. Do you think this is my first crisis? My first challenge? I've survived worse. His hand moved toward a hidden panel in his desk. Blake, he called out, but his loyal enforcer was nowhere to be seen. In the basement, the heat was becoming unbearable. Sarah helped Marcus and James set up the emergency cooling equipment, her journalist's instincts warring with her need to help. How long can the servers last in this condition? Minutes at most, James replied, his shirt soaked with sweat. Everything we've fought for, all the evidence, it's all here. If these servers fail, then Sterling wins, Marcus finished grimly. Even if we stop him, without proof, he could eventually rebuild. Their phones buzzed simultaneously. Messages from above. Antonio and Samantha were ready to implement the override, but they needed the servers stable first. In Sterling's office, the tension reached a breaking point. Security alerts flashed across multiple screens as Sterling's scorched earth protocol continued its work. Company assets were being liquidated, accounts drained, evidence destroyed. You want to know what real power is? Sterling's voice was almost conversational as he finally reached his desk. It's knowing that even in defeat, you can still bring everything down with you. His hand found the hidden panel. But before he could activate whatever final failsafe he had planned, another figure stepped into the office. Blake, his longtime enforcer, now holding a flash drive. Sir, Blake said quietly, I've copied everything. Every transaction, every order, every cover-up. If anything happens to these people, if any accidents occur, it all goes public. Sterling's face contorted with rage. You too? After everything I've done for you? You taught me to survive, Blake replied, to understand power. But watching Mrs. Santos, seeing her courage, he shook his head. Sometimes survival means knowing when to stand up. In the basement, the emergency cooling system finally kicked in. Marcus called upstairs immediately. We're stable. Do it now. Antonio's fingers entered the final sequence as Samantha called out confirmation codes. The watch key glowed in its port as decades-old safeguards activated. Throughout the building, screens flickered. The destructive protocols stuttered, then began to reverse. In the basement, James watched as the servers stabilized. Precious evidence secured. Sterling stood frozen behind his desk, watching his last attempt at control slip away. Outside his window, police helicopters circled the building. Below, the crowds of protesters had grown even larger. Mr. Sterling, Maria said softly, 15 years ago when I started working here, you never once looked me in the eye. Never saw me as a person, just someone to command, to humiliate. She stepped closer to his desk. But today I want you to look at me. Really look, see the person you thought you could break. Sterling raised his eyes, finally meeting her gaze. In that moment, something shifted in the room, a transfer of power more profound than any financial transaction. I see you, he whispered, his voice hollow. I see all of you now, but it's too late, isn't it? The office door burst open as police officers flooded in, led by federal agents. As they read Sterling his rights, Maria turned to her daughter, to their unlikely alliance of friends and fighters. It's really over, Elena breathed. No, Maria smiled, taking her daughter's hand. It's just beginning. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the city. In the basement, Sarah held up her phone, live streaming as Marcus and James emerged from the server room, evidence secured. Throughout the building, employees began returning to their offices, witnessing the end of an era and the dawn of something new. The empire had fallen, not with a bang, but with the quiet courage of those who had finally refused to kneel. Weeks following Sterling's arrest, passed in a blur of headlines, testimonies, and transformations. Empire Enterprises headquarters, once a symbol of untouchable corporate power, became a hub of reform and renewal. The morning sun now streamed through windows that had been cleaned by a new company, one founded by Maria Santos herself, dedicated to ethical labor practices and worker dignity. In the Global Herald's newsroom, Sarah Martinez put the finishing touches on her series about Sterling's fall. The stories had won her a Pulitzer nomination, but more importantly, they had helped change corporate culture across the country. Other companies, fearing similar exposures, had begun implementing reforms and transparency measures. "Look at this," Elena said, showing Sarah her phone. The latest viral video showed workers at another major corporation standing up to abusive practices, inspired by Maria's example. Dignity at work was trending nationwide. "Your mother started a movement," Sarah smiled. "Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up." Across town in a small courthouse garden, James Chen knelt before a memorial plaque. It was dedicated to all the workers who had suffered under Sterling's regime, with Tommy's name at the top. Rose stood beside her son, her hand on his shoulder. "He would be proud of you," she said softly. "Not for the mistake you made, but for how you fought to make it right." James touched the plaque gently. "I thought revenge would help me heal, but it was the truth that finally set me free." In the renovated offices of what was now called Community Enterprise Group, Samantha Chen and Antonio Rivera worked to reshape the company's culture from the ground up. The board had appointed them as co-chairs of the Ethics Committee, tasked with ensuring that power would never again corrupt the organization's soul. "We're implementing the Santos Protocol," Samantha explained to a group of business journalists. "Any employee at any level has the right to refuse unethical orders without fear of retaliation, and our whistleblower protection program is being cited as a model for the industry." Antonio smiled, holding his repaired pocket watch. "Time doesn't just move forward," he told the reporters. "Sometimes it comes full circle, giving us a chance to right old wrongs." Marcus, now heading the company's community outreach program, had turned his near-deportation experience into a mission. The company was actively recruiting immigrant workers, providing legal support and clear paths to advancement. "My father lost everything fighting Sterling's corruption," he told a group of new employees. "But today, we're building something better from the ashes of that old empire, something built on dignity, not fear." Maria Santos still couldn't quite believe how much had changed. Standing in the lobby where she had first defied Sterling, she watched the morning shift of cleaning staff arrive, now wearing uniforms designed for comfort and respect, earning fair wages, treated as essential members of the corporate family. "Mama!" Elena called, rushing through the front doors. "You need to see this." She held up her tablet, showing a news alert. Sterling's trial had ended with a guilty verdict on all counts, but it wasn't the verdict that caught Maria's attention. It was the image of former employees celebrating. Outside the courthouse, many holding signs with her photo and the words "Dignity wins." "I never wanted to be a symbol," Maria said quietly. "You're not just a symbol," Elena replied, hugging her mother. "You're proof that change is possible, that one person's courage can inspire others to find their own." In his prison cell, Sterling watched the news coverage of his former empire's transformation. The company he had built through fear and corruption was becoming a model of corporate responsibility. His legacy of power and intimidation was being replaced by one of ethics and worker dignity. But perhaps the most profound changes were the smallest ones. In break rooms and offices across the city, people began standing up to small injustices, refusing to accept humiliation as part of their job. The viral video of a cleaning lady saying no had become a catalyst for countless acts of everyday courage. Back in the lobby, Maria prepared to leave for the day. She had a meeting with her new company's board, then a speaking engagement at a workers' rights conference. As she walked toward the door, a young janitor stopped her. "Mrs. Santos," he said shyly, "I just wanted to thank you. Before your story, I was afraid to speak up about anything, but now—" He stood straighter. "Now I know that dignity isn't something they give us. It's something we claim for ourselves." Maria smiled, remembering her own journey from silence to strength. "Just remember," she told him, "courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about standing up even when you are afraid." Outside, the city hummed with morning energy. Workers streamed into buildings, but something was different now. Heads were held higher, voices were stronger, and in offices across the skyline, people were learning that power built on fear could never stand against the quiet strength of human dignity. The empire had fallen, but something far more valuable had risen in its place, a community built on respect, justice, and the simple, unshakable courage to stand up and say no to injustice, no matter the cost. 6 months after Sterling's conviction, the changes sparked by one cleaning lady's defiance had spread far, beyond the walls of a single corporation. Maria Santos stood at a podium in a packed university auditorium, sharing her story with a new generation of business students. "Dignity," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "is not a privilege to be granted by the powerful. It is a right that belongs to every human being." She looked out at the sea of young faces, seeing in them the future she had helped create. But rights must be defended, must be fought for, must be claimed. Elena, now finishing her law degree while working part-time at the Global Herald with Sarah Martinez, watched her mother from the front row. Beside her sat Marcus Rivera, who had turned the company's community outreach program into a model for corporate social responsibility. After the lecture, as students crowded around Maria for questions and photos, a young woman approached Elena. "Your mother's story changed my life," she said softly. "I was working as an intern, enduring harassment because I thought that's just how things were. But after seeing her video," the young woman stood straighter, "I spoke up, and I wasn't the only one." Across town, in the renovated offices of Community Enterprise Group, Samantha Chen and Antonio Rivera were implementing the final phases of their corporate restructuring. The Santos Protocol had been adopted by companies across the country, and their whistleblower protection program had become industry standard. "Look at these numbers," Samantha said, showing Antonio the latest reports. "Employee satisfaction, up 87%. Productivity increased by 35%, and our ethical business rating is the highest in the sector." Antonio nodded, but his attention was on a different document, a letter from Sterling, sent from prison. "He still doesn't understand," he said, passing the letter to Samantha. "He writes about power as if it's something that can only be taken, never shared." The letter was typical Sterling, a mixture of threats and attempts at manipulation, suggesting that they were naive to think business could succeed without fear and domination. But his words carried no weight anymore. The empire he had built on fear had been replaced by something stronger, a community built on mutual respect and shared dignity. James Chen, now heading the company's workplace safety division, had transformed his grief into purpose. The memorial for Tommy had become a gathering place for workers' rights advocates, and the scholarship fund in his name helped children of low-income workers pursue their education. "I used to think justice meant making someone pay for their wrongs," he told his mother Rose as they tended the memorial garden together. "But real justice, it's about making sure the wrongs can't happen again." Rose smiled, seeing in her son the healing she had prayed for. Sometimes the best revenge is creating something better than what was destroyed. In the lobby where it all began, the spot where Maria had refused to kneel was marked by a small plaque. Here stood dignity. Here began change. But more meaningful than the plaque were the daily interactions. Security guards greeting cleaning staff by name, executives holding doors for maintenance workers, people at all levels treating each other with respect. Sarah Martinez's series about the fall of Sterling's empire had sparked investigations at other corporations. Blake, Sterling's former enforcer turned whistleblower, had become a consultant helping companies identify and eliminate toxic workplace practices. "The most surprising thing," he told Sarah in a follow-up interview, "is how many people were just waiting for permission to be human, to show kindness, to stand up for each other. They just needed to see that it was possible." Maria's cleaning company had grown into a worker-owned cooperative, offering fair wages, benefits, and dignity to those who had long been treated as invisible. But more than the business success, she treasured the stories she heard almost daily, of other workers finding their voice, standing up to abuse, refusing to accept humiliation as part of their job. One evening, as she cleaned her own office, she insisted on taking regular shifts, never wanting to forget where she came from. Eleanor found her mother staring out the window at the city skyline. "What are you thinking about, Mama?" Maria smiled, touching the window where her reflection overlapped with the distant lights. "I'm thinking about that morning when I said no. I was so afraid. I thought I would lose everything. Instead," she turned to her daughter, "instead, we gained a world where everyone can walk with their heads held high." Elena hugged her mother, understanding that the true power of that moment hadn't been in the defiance itself, but in how it had shown others their own strength. The viral video hadn't just exposed Sterling's cruelty, it had revealed the courage that lived in every person who had ever swallowed their dignity to survive. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm, but it was a different city now. In offices and shops, in boardrooms and break rooms, people moved with a new awareness of their own worth. The empire of fear had fallen, replaced by countless small acts of courage and respect. And somewhere in a prison cell, Maxwell Sterling watched on TV as his former cleaning lady received another humanitarian award, still unable to understand. That true power had never been about making people kneel. It had always been about helping them stand. 1 year to the day after Maria Santos had refused to kneel, the former Empire Enterprises building buzzed with a different kind of energy. The Community Enterprise Group was hosting its first annual Dignity in the Workplace Conference, bringing together workers, executives, and activists from across the country. The main lobby, where it had all begun, had been transformed into an exhibition space. Sarah Martinez's Pulitzer-winning articles lined one wall, while another displayed a timeline of the movement that had grown from Maria's act of defiance. The viral video played on a loop, but now it was accompanied by hundreds of other clips, showing similar moments of courage from workplaces around the world. "It's amazing," Eleanor told Marcus as they walked through the exhibition. Each of these stories, these moments of bravery, they all trace back to that morning. Marcus squeezed her hand, his father's watch now keeping perfect time on his wrist. "Your mother showed people that change isn't just possible, it's inevitable once someone takes the first stand." In a corner of the lobby, Rose Chen sat with a group of visitors, sharing her family's story. The tragedy of Tommy's accident had been transformed into a catalyst for change, with the Tommy Chen Safety Initiative now protecting workers across the industry. James stood nearby, watching his mother with pride, his own journey from guilt to redemption, giving hope to others struggling with similar choices. Samantha Chen, taking a break from her keynote speech preparations, found Antonio Rivera reviewing applications for the next round of community outreach grants. "Remember when this lobby was all about showing off power and wealth?" she asked, looking around at the transformed space. Antonio nodded, smiling at a grant proposal from a worker-owned cooperative similar to Maria's. "Now it's about showing what's possible when people stand together." The conference's main event was a panel discussion featuring Maria Santos, but not as the star. Instead, she sat among other workers who had found their voice, each sharing their own stories of standing up to injustice. A hospital orderly who had exposed dangerous cost-cutting measures, a restaurant worker who had organized her colleagues against wage theft, a factory employee who had refused to cover up safety violations. Courage, Maria told the audience, is contagious. When one person stands up, others realize they can too. When one voice speaks truth, other voices join in. This movement didn't succeed because of me. It succeeded because of all of you who saw that video and decided you could be brave too. In the year since Sterling's fall, the changes had rippled out in ways no one could have predicted. Companies voluntarily adopted worker protection policies, fearing the public backlash of being the next viral video of workplace abuse. Labor unions reported record membership as employees felt empowered to demand better conditions. Business schools added ethical leadership courses, using the Sterling case as a warning of how power could corrupt. But perhaps the most profound changes were the personal ones. Blake, who had chosen conscience over loyalty, now ran an ethics consulting firm, helping other corporate insiders find the courage to speak up. James Chen had found peace not in vengeance, but in preventing other families from suffering as his had. Samantha had discovered that her legal skills could build justice rather than shield corruption. During a break in the conference, Elena found her mother in the exact spot where she had refused to clean Sterling's spite. "Do you ever regret it, Mama, taking that stand?" Maria touched the commemorative plaque, remembering the fear and uncertainty of that moment. "The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner, but maybe it had to happen exactly when it did, exactly how it did. Sometimes the universe knows better than we do." As the conference continued, news broke that Sterling had given his first prison interview. But instead of the sensational exposé the media had expected, what emerged was the picture of a man still unable to comprehend how his empire had been brought down by the simple dignity of those he had thought powerless. He still doesn't understand. Sarah Martinez told her readers that true power doesn't come from making others feel small. It comes from helping others recognize their own greatness. The day ended with a candlelight vigil in the Memorial Garden, honoring not just Tommy Chen, but all those who had suffered under systems of oppression and fear. As the participants shared stories and songs, a sense of healing and hope filled the air. Rose Chen, standing between her son and Maria Santos, looked up at the stars becoming visible in the darkening sky. "When Tommy was taken from us, I thought our family's story would always be about loss. But look what grew from our pain, a movement that's helping other families avoid the same suffering." Maria nodded, holding Elena's hand tight. "That's the real power of dignity. It turns victims into leaders, pain into purpose, defeat into determination." As the conference participants departed, carrying their newfound courage and connections back to their own communities, the transformed building stood as a testament to what was possible. The empire of fear had fallen, but in its place had risen something far more powerful, a network of people who had discovered their own strength, their own voice, their own dignity. And in offices and workplaces across the country, security cameras captured a new kind of viral moment, not of abuse and humiliation, but of people standing up for each other, helping each other, treating each other with the respect every human being deserves. The revolution that had begun with a cleaning lady saying no had become a movement of millions saying yes to their own dignity, their own worth, their own power to create change. Elena Santos stood at the podium of her law school graduation ceremony, looking out at the sea of faces before her. As valedictorian, she had been chosen to give the commencement speech, but her words today weren't just for her fellow graduates. They were for everyone who had been part of the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she began, I watched my mother stand up to one of the most powerful men in the city. She didn't have wealth or influence. She didn't have an army of lawyers or a corporate empire. All she had was her dignity and the courage to defend it. In the audience, Maria Santos wiped away tears of pride as she sat between Rose Chen and Sarah Martinez. Around them were faces that had become family over the past 2 years. Marcus Rivera, his father Antonio, Samantha Chen, James Chen, and even Blake, who had found his own redemption in helping others find their courage. That moment taught me something about justice, Elena continued. It taught me that laws are important, but they're not enough. Real change happens when people find the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the law might not be on their side. When they refuse to accept injustice, even when it wears a suit and sits in a corner office. The Community Enterprise Group, rising from the ashes of Sterling's empire, had become a case study in corporate transformation. Under the joint leadership of Samantha Chen and Antonio Rivera, it had pioneered new models of workplace democracy and ethical business practices. The Santos Protocol was now being taught in business schools across the country. But the most important lesson, Elena said, her voice strong and clear, wasn't about corporate policy or legal reform. It was about the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. When my mother said no that morning, she wasn't trying to start a movement. She was simply defending her human dignity. But that single act of courage sparked something in others, a recognition that they too could stand up, speak out, demand better. In the back of the auditorium, a group of cleaning staff from Maria's cooperative stood watching. They wore their uniforms with pride, knowing they were part of a company that valued their humanity as much as their labor. Among them was the young janitor, who had first thanked Maria in the lobby, now a supervisor helping other workers find their voice. As we leave these halls today, armed with our law degrees and our dreams of justice, let's remember that real change often starts in unexpected places. It starts with a cleaning lady refusing to kneel. It starts with a father choosing truth over vengeance. It starts with each of us deciding that dignity is not negotiable. The audience burst into applause, but Elena wasn't finished. She pulled out a familiar object, the USB drive that had helped bring down Sterling's empire. This drive once held evidence of corruption and abuse. Today it holds something else, stories. Stories of people who found their courage, who stood up for their dignity, who chose to be part of the change. She held up the drive, letting it catch the light. These stories are now part of a national archive, documenting not just the fall of an empire built on fear, but the rise of a movement built on dignity. And every day new stories are being added. Every day someone else finds their voice. In the audience, James Chen held his mother's hand tightly. The pain of losing Tommy would never completely fade, but they had found a way to transform their grief into purpose. The Tommy Chen Memorial Foundation was now the largest private funder of workplace safety initiatives in the country. Some people say that power only respects power, Elena continued, that the only way to fight corruption is with money, influence, or force, but we proved them wrong. We showed that the most powerful force in the world is the human spirit when it refuses to be broken. She looked at her mother, seeing in Maria's eyes the same quiet strength that had changed everything. My mother taught me that dignity isn't something that can be taken away. It can only be surrendered. And when we stop surrendering it, when we start standing up for ourselves and each other, nothing can stop us. The graduation ceremony ended with a standing ovation, but the real celebration was in the small moments afterward. The hugs, the tears, the shared looks of understanding between people who had been part of something larger than themselves. Later that evening, at a small gathering in the transformed lobby where it had all begun, Maria watched her daughter chatting with young lawyers and activists, all eager to be part of the continuing change. Marcus stood beside Elena, his father's watch now a symbol not of time lost, but of time reclaimed. "You must be so proud," Rose said softly, joining Maria by the window. Maria nodded, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold. Proud of her, yes, but also proud of all of us. We all had to find our courage in our own ways. The city spread out before them, different now from the one that had existed 2 years ago, not just in the visible changes the worker owned, businesses, the ethical corporate practices, the new labor laws, but in the invisible ones. The way people carried themselves, the way they treated each other, the way they refused to accept that power meant the right to humiliate. As night fell over the city, lights began to twinkle in office windows. But these weren't just buildings anymore. They were places where people had found their voice, their strength, their dignity. And in each light, there was the possibility of another person standing up, another voice joining the chorus, another seed of change taking root. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Maria Santos's office, casting warm light on the wall of photographs that told the story of the past 2 years. There she was in the viral video, standing up to Sterling. There was Elena at her law school graduation, Marcus and Antonio reopening the company under its new name, Samantha and James implementing the Santos Protocol, Rose tending the memorial garden, each image a chapter in a story that had changed countless lives. A knock at her door pulled Maria from her reminiscence. A young woman stood there, clutching a tablet, her eyes bright with purpose. "Mrs. Santos, I'm Jennifer Chen, Tommy's cousin. I'm doing a documentary about workplace transformation, and I was hoping—" Maria smiled, gesturing for her to enter. "Of course, James mentioned you were working on this project." Jennifer set up her equipment, her hands slightly shaky with excitement. "Your story, it's become so much more than just the fall of Sterling's empire. It's become a blueprint for change. People around the world are using it as a model for their own movements." As the interview began, Maria found herself reflecting on how much had changed. The company where she had once been just a cleaning lady was now a global leader in ethical business practices. The Santos Protocol had been adopted by corporations across continents. Worker dignity had become more than a slogan. It was becoming a fundamental expectation. "Tell me," Jennifer asked, "did you know in that moment, when you refused to kneel, what it would lead to?" Maria shook her head. "I only knew I couldn't bear one more humiliation. I couldn't let my daughter grow up thinking that was how the world had to be." She touched a photo of Elena speaking at a United Nations conference on worker rights. Sometimes, the biggest changes start with the smallest refusals. Across town, in the Community Enterprise Group's main conference room, Elena was leading a training session for corporate executives from around the world. The topic: implementing dignity-based leadership practices. "Power doesn't have to corrupt," she told them, her mother's strength evident in her voice. "It can elevate, it can inspire, it can transform, but only if we choose to use it wisely." Marcus sat in the back of the room, watching with pride as his fiancée shared the lessons they had all learned. His father's watch kept time on his wrist, no longer a reminder of what had been lost, but a symbol of what had been gained. In the memorial garden, James and Rose Chen hosted a group of families who had lost loved ones to corporate negligence. But this wasn't a gathering of grief. It was a workshop on turning pain into purpose, on using personal tragedy to prevent future suffering. Tommy's story didn't end with his accident, James told them, his voice steady and strong. It continued through every life we've saved with better safety protocols, every family we've helped avoid our pain, every change we've made to ensure no one else has to experience what we did. Samantha Chen, reviewing the latest global impact reports in her office, couldn't help but smile at the numbers. Workplace satisfaction up, harassment complaints down, whistleblower protections strengthened. But it was the personal stories that really showed the change, the countless emails and letters from workers who had found their voice, who had stood up for their dignity, who had refused to accept abuse as the price of employment. Blake, now running ethics workshops for corporate security teams, had found his own form of redemption in teaching others how to use their power for protection rather than intimidation. The strongest security, he would tell his students, comes from creating an environment where people feel valued, respected, and heard. As the day drew to a close, Maria's office filled with familiar faces. They had gathered for their monthly dinner, a tradition that had started during the hardest days of their struggle and continued now as a celebration of their ongoing journey. Elena arrived with Marcus, their matching engagement rings catching the light. Samantha brought reports of new companies adopting the Santos Protocol. James and Rose came with fresh flowers from the memorial garden. Antonio carried his old briefcase, now filled not with evidence of corruption, but with plans for future initiatives. "Sometimes, I wonder," Rose said as they shared a meal together, "what Sterling would think if he could see all this, his empire of fear transformed into something so beautiful." "He had his chance to understand," Maria replied softly. "He chose power over dignity, control over respect. But look what we built from the ruins of his choices." As night fell over the city, the lights in office buildings took on a different meaning. Each window represented a space where people worked with dignity, where respect was not a privilege but a right, where courage was celebrated rather than crushed. In his prison, Cell Sterling watched a news report about the global spread of the Santos Protocol. Perhaps in some small corner of his mind, he was beginning to understand what true power looked like. Not the power to make others kneel, but the power to help them stand. The story that had begun with a simple act of defiance had come full circle. The cleaning lady who had refused to kneel had helped create a world where fewer people would have to. The daughter who had watched her mother stand up had become a voice for those still finding their courage. The empire built on fear had been replaced by a community built on dignity. And in offices and workplaces around the world, people were learning what Maria Santos had shown them, that change begins not with grand gestures or powerful influences, but with the simple, unshakable decision to stand up for one's own dignity, and by doing so, standing up for the dignity of all. 3. Years after the fall of Sterling's empire, Maria Santos found herself in places she never could have imagined. Today, she stood before the United Nations General Assembly, addressing delegates from around the world about the global movement for workplace dignity that had grown from her simple act of defiance. Change, she told the assembled leaders, her voice carried by translators to ears across the globe, is not something that happens to us. It's something that happens through us. Each of us has the power to stand up, to say no to injustice, to demand the dignity that is our birthright. In Maid, the audience, Elena sat between Marcus and Sarah Martinez, watching her mother with pride. The Global Herald's coverage of Sterling's fall had sparked similar investigations worldwide, exposing corporate abuse and catalyzing reforms across continents. Sarah's series had become a textbook case in journalism schools, teaching future reporters about the power of giving voice to the voiceless. Back in their home city, the transformation continued to spread in ways no one could have predicted. The Community Enterprise Group, under Samantha and Antonio's leadership, had become a global model for ethical business practices. Companies that had once competed through intimidation and exploitation now raced to adopt worker-centered policies. James Chen, walking through the expanded memorial garden that now occupied an entire city block, stopped to speak with a group of international visitors. The garden had become a pilgrimage site of sorts, drawing people from around the world who sought to understand how change begins. "My son's accident was caused by a system that valued profit over people," he explained, touching the memorial plaque. "But his legacy helps create a system that puts humanity first. Every safety regulation we've helped pass, every life we've helped save, that's Tommy's true memorial." In her office at the newly established Center for Workplace Dignity, Rose, Chen mentored the next generation of corporate reformers. The old way of doing business, she told her students, was built on the idea that power means the right to dominate others. The new way understands that true power comes from empowering others. Marcus, now heading the Community Enterprise Group's global outreach program, had turned his father's watch into a symbol of their mission. "Time doesn't just move forward," he would say in his presentations. "It moves in circles. The injustices of the past can become the catalyst for future change." The Santos Protocol had evolved beyond its original scope, becoming a comprehensive framework for organizational transformation. Companies that adopted it reported not just improved worker satisfaction and reduced turnover, but increased productivity and innovation. It turned out that when people felt safe, respected, and valued, they did their best work. Blake's ethics consulting firm had expanded to offices in 12 countries, helping organizations transition from cultures of fear to cultures of respect. "The most secure company," he would tell his clients, "is one where every employee feels secure in their dignity." Even Sterling's story had become a teaching tool. Business schools used his fall as a case study in how power corrupts and how ethical leadership builds stronger organizations than fear ever could. His prison interviews, once filled with bitterness and denial, had gradually shifted to something approaching understanding. "I built an empire on fear," he had told a documentary filmmaker, "because I thought that was the only way to maintain control. I never understood that fear creates enemies, while respect creates allies." As Maria concluded her UN speech, the applause that filled the chamber represented more than appreciation for her words. It was recognition of a truth that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged, that dignity is not a privilege to be granted by the powerful, but a right inherent in every human being. Later that evening, in a small restaurant near the UN building, the original group gathered for dinner. Eleanor and Marcus shared news of their upcoming wedding. Sarah discussed her new book about grassroots movements for corporate reform. James and Rose talked about the Memorial Garden's latest expansion. Samantha and Antonio reported on the growing number of companies adopting their ethical business model. "Sometimes I think about that morning," Maria said softly, looking around at the faces that had become family. "How afraid I was. how alone I felt. I never imagined. But that's how change happens, isn't it? Elena finished for her mother. Not through grand plans or powerful alliances, but through simple moments of courage, through one person standing up and showing others it's possible. Outside the restaurant, the New York skyline glittered with promise. In offices across the city, across the world, people were finding their voice, claiming their dignity, transforming their workplaces. The revolution that had begun with a cleaning lady's refusal to kneel had become a global movement for human dignity. And somewhere in the city, another worker was standing up, another voice was speaking out, another seed of change was taking root. The ripples continued to spread, touching lives far beyond the walls where it had all begun, creating a future where dignity was not just a right, but a reality. The day of Elena and Marcus's wedding dawned bright and clear. The ceremony, held in the memorial garden that had grown from a place of grief into a symbol of transformation. Flowers bloomed around Tommy's memorial, their colors vibrant against the polished stone that bore not just his name now, but the names of all those who had suffered under the old system. Maria Santos watched her daughter walk down the aisle, arm in arm with Marcus Rivera, seeing in their union something larger than just two people in love. They represented the future they had all fought for, a future where dignity and respect were the foundation of every relationship, personal and professional. The guest list told its own story of transformation. Samantha Chen sat with her family, including her sister, whose restaurant had not only survived Sterling's threats but thrived in the new economy of ethical business. Antonio Rivera beamed with pride, his old pocket watch now restored and keeping perfect time. James and Rose Chen shared quiet smiles, their healing journey having led them to this moment of joy. Sarah Martinez, taking a break from covering global labor movements, sat with her notebook closed for once, simply absorbing the significance of the moment. Blake, now a respected voice in corporate ethics, had found his own peace in helping others find their moral compass. Love, the officiant said, is not just about two people choosing each other. It's about choosing the kind of world we want to create together. Elena and Marcus have shown us that love can be a force for change, that personal happiness and social justice can grow from the same root. As the newlyweds exchanged vows, Maria's mind drifted back to that morning in Sterling's lobby. How could she have known that her simple refusal to kneel would lead to this moment? That her daughter would find love with the son of another person Sterling had tried to destroy? That their union would symbolize the healing of so many old wounds? The reception was held in the transformed lobby of the Community Enterprise Group, now a space that celebrated the dignity of every person who passed through its doors. Where Sterling's portrait had once hung, there was now a mural depicting the movement that had grown from Maria's stand, scenes of workers standing up for their rights, of communities coming together, of fear giving way to courage. During the celebrations, Rose Chen found Maria standing before the mural. "Look at what grew from your courage," she said softly. "Not just changes in laws and policies, but changes in hearts." Maria squeezed Rose's hand. "We all had to find our courage. We all had to choose dignity over fear." As evening fell, the newlyweds took to the dance floor. Elena, radiant in her wedding dress, whispered something that made Marcus laugh, his father's watch gleaming on his wrist. James Chen raised a toast to the couple, his voice strong with hope rather than grief. Samantha and Antonio shared knowing looks, their vision of ethical business now a reality being passed to the next generation. Later, as the celebration continued, Maria slipped away to the spot where it had all begun. The plaque marking her stand was now accompanied by hundreds of others, each telling a story of someone who had found the courage to stand up, to speak out, to choose dignity over submission. A young janitor, part of Maria's worker-owned cooperative, was carefully cleaning the plaques. He smiled when he saw her, standing a little straighter. "Mrs. Santos," he said, "I was just reading these stories again. They give me strength." Maria touched one of the plaques gently. "That's why we preserve them. To remind everyone that change is possible, that dignity is worth fighting for." Back at the reception, Eleanor found her mother and pulled her onto the dance floor. As they moved to the music, mother and daughter, past and future, Maria felt tears of joy in her eyes. "Are you happy, Mama?" Elena asked softly. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Maria replied. "I'm grateful that my moment of courage helped create a world where you can live and work with dignity, where your children will never have to kneel." As the night drew to a close, the guests gathered for a final tradition. Each person held a small light, and one by one, they shared their hopes for the future. Hope for a world where dignity was not just a right but a reality, where power meant the ability to lift others up, not push them down, where courage was celebrated and fear had no hold. The lights merged into a soft glow that illuminated the transformed lobby, casting warm shadows on the faces of those who had been part of this journey. In that light, Maria saw not just the end of one story, but the beginning of countless others. For every act of courage inspires another. Every stand for dignity creates ripples that touch distant shores. Every moment of transformation opens the door for more change to come. And somewhere in the city, in cities around the world, someone else was finding their courage, standing up for their dignity, choosing to be part of the change. The revolution that had begun with a cleaning lady's refusal to kneel continued to grow, one brave heart at a time. For that was the true legacy of their struggle, not just the fall of an empire built on fear, but the rise of a movement built on dignity. Not just the transformation of one company or one community, but the awakening of a global consciousness that recognized the inherent worth of every human being. And in that recognition lay the seeds of lasting change, the promise of a future, where dignity was not just a dream, but a daily reality, where courage was not just an act but a way of life, where love and justice grew together in the garden of human possibility. 5 years had passed since Maria Santos first stood up to Maxwell, Sterling, and the world had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Community Enterprise Group's headquarters now hosted the Global Institute for Workplace Dignity, drawing leaders and activists from around the world to learn about the transformation that had begun in that very building. On this particular morning, Maria stood in the Institute's main hall, surrounded by photographs documenting the journey. Young students from various countries moved from image to image, studying the history of the movement. They stopped longest at the viral video display, watching the moment that had sparked it all. Mrs. Santos, a young woman with bright eyes, approached her. "I'm Isabella from Brazil. Your story, it inspired an entire movement in my country. Factory workers, domestic helpers, office staff, they all started standing up for their rights." Maria smiled, remembering how alone she had felt that first morning. "The courage was always there," she said. "Sometimes we just need to see someone else take the first step." Across the hall, Elena Santos Rivera led a workshop on implementing ethical business practices. Her law firm, specialized in workers' rights, had become the go-to resource for companies seeking to transform their corporate culture. Marcus sat among the participants, still wearing his father's watch, now running the Community Enterprise Group's international expansion program. The Santos Protocol isn't just about rules and regulations, Elena explained to her audience. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity in every human being. When we build businesses on that foundation, everything else falls into place. In another part of the building, James Chen hosted a group of corporate safety officers in the expanded Tommy Chen Memorial Center. The walls were lined with safety innovations that had grown from their advocacy, new protocols, improved equipment, better training programs. "My son's accident was preventable," he told them, his voice strong with purpose rather than pain, but his legacy has helped prevent countless other tragedies. Every life saved, every injury prevented. That's Tommy's gift to the world. Rose Chen, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, ran the center's mentorship program, pairing experienced activists with young advocates. "Change doesn't end with one victory," she often said. "It continues through the people we inspire, the lessons we pass on." Samantha Chen and Antonio Rivera had expanded their ethical business model. Globally, companies that adopted their framework reported not just improved worker satisfaction and safety, but increased productivity and innovation. It turned out that treating people with dignity was also good for the bottom line. The old way of doing business was based on fear, Samantha told a group of international executives. The new way is based on respect, and the results speak for themselves. Sarah Martinez, whose coverage had helped spark the global movement, was now documenting similar transformations around the world. Her latest book chronicled workplace dignity, movements from South America to Southeast Asia, all inspired by Maria's stand. Even Blake had found his calling, running an international consulting firm that helped companies transition from cultures of fear to cultures of respect. Security doesn't come from control, he would tell his clients. It comes from creating an environment where everyone feels valued. In the Memorial Garden, now a sprawling green space in the heart of the city, Maria found a quiet moment alone. The garden had become more than a memorial. It was a living testament to the power of transformation. Workers on their lunch breaks sat among the flowers, students studied on benches, children played on paths named after those who had fought for change. A small group of tourists stopped nearby, listening to their guide explain the significance of the place. This garden, the guide said, grew from a single act of courage. A cleaning lady who refused to kneel became the catalyst for global change. Maria smiled to herself, remembering the fear she had felt that morning, the uncertainty that had almost held her back. How could she have known that her simple refusal would spark such transformation? Elena found her mother there, sitting among the flowers. "Deep thoughts, Mama?" "I was just thinking about how far we've come," Maria replied. "Not just us, but everyone who found their courage along the way." "And there's still so much more to do," Elena said, sitting beside her mother. "Every day someone else stands up. Every day another workplace transforms. Every day the ripples spread further." Above them, the building that had once been Sterling's fortress of fear now stood as a beacon of hope. Its windows reflected the setting sun, casting warm light over the garden where so many had found their voice, their strength, their dignity. And somewhere, in the city, in cities around the world, another worker was rising up, another voice was speaking out, another seed of change was taking root. The revolution that had begun with a cleaning lady's refusal to kneel continued to grow, touching lives, in ways she could never have imagined. For that was the true power of dignity. Once claimed, it could never be taken away. Once shared, it multiplied beyond measure. Once understood, it became the foundation for a better world. On the 10th anniversary of what had become known as The Stand, the Community Enterprise Group's headquarters hummed with activity. A global conference on workplace dignity had brought together activists, business leaders, and workers from every corner of the world. But the most significant event was happening in a small room overlooking the Memorial Garden. Maxwell Sterling, recently released from prison, had requested a meeting with Maria Santos. The request had shocked everyone, but Maria, after careful consideration, had agreed. Now they sat across from each other, two people whose lives had become inextricably linked by a moment of defiance. "Mrs. Santos," Sterling began, his voice, softer than she remembered, the arrogance replaced by something like humility. "For 10 years I've thought about that morning, about what I did, what you did, what it all meant." Maria watched him carefully, seeing not the titan who had once terrorized an empire, but an old man who had learned hard lessons. "And what did you learn, Mr. Sterling?" "I learned that power built on fear is no power at all. It's an illusion that collapses the moment someone is brave enough to say no." He looked out the window at the garden below. "I built an empire by making people feel small. You built a movement by helping them stand tall." In the conference halls below, Eleanor and Marcus were leading a session on the next phase of workplace transformation. Their young daughter, named Rosa, after both Rose Chen and Maria's grandmother, played quietly in the corner, growing up in a world where dignity was not just a concept, but a lived reality. "The Santos Protocol isn't just about protecting workers," Elena told the assembled crowd. It's about creating spaces where everyone can thrive, where innovation comes from collaboration rather than competition, where success is measured in human terms as well as financial ones. Samantha Chen and Antonio Rivera presented the latest data on companies that had adopted their ethical business model. The numbers were staggering: improved productivity, reduced turnover, increased innovation, and stronger bottom lines. What had begun as a moral imperative had proven to be good business practice as well. "When we started this journey," Antonio said, his old watch now displayed in the Institute's museum, "people said we were dreamers. They said business couldn't survive without fear, without dominance. We proved them wrong." James Chen, speaking to a group of safety advocates, shared the latest developments in workplace protection. The Tommy Chen safety standards had been adopted by industries worldwide, saving countless lives. "My son's legacy," he told them, "lives in every worker who goes home safely to their family." Rose Chen, though retired from active management, still served as the movement's elder stateswoman. Her wisdom, born from decades of witnessing both tragedy and triumph, helped guide the next generation of advocates. "Change," she often said, "is not just about policies and protocols, it's about changing hearts." Back in the small meeting room, Sterling struggled to find the right words. "I spent years in prison, angry at you, at everyone who brought down my empire. But eventually I started watching what you built in its place." He paused. "It was better than anything I ever created." Maria thought about the countless lives touched by the transformation, the ripples that had spread far beyond that morning, in the lobby. "We all have a choice, Mr. Sterling. Every day we choose what kind of world we want to create." "I chose wrong," he admitted quietly. "I chose power over dignity, control over respect. I never understood that true strength comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down." Below in the garden, Sarah Martinez was interviewing workers from around the world, collecting stories for her next book. Each testimony added another thread to the tapestry of transformation that had begun with Maria's stand. Blake, leading a workshop on ethical security practices, shared his own journey, from enforcer to advocate. "True security," he told his audience, "comes from creating environments where everyone feels valued, where dignity is protected, where voices are heard." As the day drew to a close, the conference participants gathered in the garden for a candlelight vigil. They stood together, executives and janitors, managers and maintenance workers, each holding a light, each part of the continuing change. Sterling watched from the window, seeing what his empire could have been if he had understood sooner. "Thank you," he said finally to Maria, "not for bringing down my empire, but for showing everyone a better way." Maria joined the vigil below, taking her place between her daughter and Rose Chen. As the lights twinkled in the gathering dusk, she thought about how far they had come and how far there still was to go. The world was changing, one workplace at a time, one voice at a time, one stand at a time. For dignity, once recognized, could never be unfelt. Courage, once found, could never be lost. And change, once begun, could never be stopped. The revolution that had started with a simple refusal to kneel had become a global movement for human dignity, touching lives in ways that even its pioneers could never have imagined. As the sun set on the final day of the global conference, Maria Santos stood in the transformed lobby where it had all begun. The space that had once symbolized corporate power now hummed with a different kind of energy, the collective strength of people who had learned to stand tall, to speak up, to claim their dignity. Elena approached her mother, little Rosa holding her hand. "Mama, it's time for the closing ceremony." The ceremony was being held in the Memorial Garden, now a sprawling sanctuary that occupied an entire city block. Thousands of lights twinkled among the flowers, each representing a story of transformation, a moment of courage, a stand for dignity. James and Rose Chen were already there, alongside Samantha and Antonio. Marcus stood with his father, both wearing watches that now kept perfect time. Sarah Martinez had her notebook open, still documenting the ongoing revolution. Blake stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, his journey from enforcer to protector complete. And there, in the back of the gathering, stood Maxwell Sterling, no longer the titan who had ruled through fear, but a witness to the power of transformation. He had asked to attend, to see firsthand what had grown from the ashes of his empire. Maria took her place at the podium, looking out at faces from around the world, workers, executives, activists, and advocates, all part of the movement that had grown from her simple act of defiance. 10 years ago, she began, I stood in that lobby and refused to kneel. I was afraid. I was alone. I thought I would lose everything. She smiled, looking at her daughter, her granddaughter, her extended family of fighters and dreamers. Instead, I found something precious, my dignity. And in finding it, I helped others find theirs. The crowd listened in reverent silence as she continued. But this movement was never about one person's stand. It was about all of us recognizing our own worth, our own strength. It was about understanding that dignity isn't something that can be given or taken away. It's something we all possess, something we must all protect. Elena stepped forward, holding Rosa's hand. The world my daughter is growing up in is different from the one I knew. She will never have to watch her mother kneel. She will never have to choose between dignity and survival. But there is still work to do, still battles to fight, still voices waiting to be heard. One by one, representatives from different countries shared their stories of transformation. A factory worker from Bangladesh, who had organized her colleagues for better conditions. An office worker from Brazil who had exposed systematic harassment. A janitor from Japan who had rallied his co-workers for fair wages. As night fell, the garden blazed with thousands of lights. Rose Chen, supported by James, lit the eternal flame at the center of the memorial, a symbol of ongoing commitment to dignity and justice. This flame, she announced, her voice strong despite her years, burns for those who suffered under the old system, for those who found their courage to change it, and for those who continue the fight. It burns for Tommy, for all the others who paid the price of corporate greed. But most of all, it burns as a promise that we will never return to a world where dignity is seen as a privilege rather than a right. Sterling watched from the shadows, tears in his eyes. The empire he had built through fear had been transformed into something he had never imagined possible, a community built on respect, strength drawn from unity, power used to elevate rather than dominate. Maria found him there as the ceremony drew to a close. "Mr. Sterling," she said softly, "you're welcome to join us." He shook his head. "I'm not here to join. I'm here to learn, to understand what I never could before." He looked at the flame, at the gathered crowd, at the transformed building behind. "Them, you built something beautiful from the ruins of my mistakes." The night air filled with music as workers from different countries shared their traditional songs of struggle and hope. Eleanor and Marcus danced with little Rosa, who would grow up knowing only a world where dignity was celebrated, where courage was honored, where voices were heard. Samantha and Antonio shared knowing looks, their vision of ethical business now a reality being passed to the next generation. James held his mother close, their pain transformed into purpose, their loss into legacy. Sarah captured it all in her notebook, knowing that these stories would inspire others yet to find their voice. As the celebration continued, Maria found a quiet moment in the spot where she had first said no. The plaque marking that moment was worn smooth by the touches of thousands who had drawn inspiration from her stand. A young worker approached her, eyes bright with purpose. "Mrs. Santos," she said, "I'm starting a new job tomorrow. Thanks to you, I know that my dignity isn't negotiable. I know that I have the right to stand tall." Maria hugged her, feeling in this young woman's strength the continuation of what had begun 10 years ago. For that was the true miracle of their movement. It lived not in buildings or protocols or programs, but in the hearts of people who had learned to value themselves and each other. The revolution that had begun with a cleaning lady's refusal to kneel had become an eternal flame, lighting the way for others to find their courage, claim their dignity, and stand tall in their truth. For in the end, the greatest power was not in making others kneel, but in helping them rise. The strongest voice was not the one that commanded silence, but the one that invited others to speak. And the most lasting change came not from fear, but from the simple, unshakable knowledge that every human being deserved to be treated with dignity. As the stars emerged above the garden, Maria Santos looked at what had grown from her moment of courage, not just a movement or a protocol or a global transformation, but a new way of being in the world. A way built on dignity, sustained by courage, and passed on through the eternal flame of human spirit that burned bright in every heart, that dared to stand up and say, "I am worthy, I am valuable, I will not kneel."